All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. So my presentation tonight is an app for better trailhead data management. And I think we'll have plenty of time to discuss any questions at the end. And I'll jump right into it. So I guess a little bit just about my perspective here and background. I've been exploring the Adirondack Park pretty much my whole life. I'm told my first hike was in a backpack at the age of 3 months. I started backpacking here myself when I was 8, and I now live in Schenectady, so I'm frequently up in the park for day hikes and not as frequently as I'd like overnight trips as well. I studied ecology and evolutionary biology as an undergraduate, and as a graduate student, studied public administration with a lot of emphasis on program evaluation and public sector innovation practices, including in technology. I work in the technology and data management sector, and I've been doing that for a long time. I started building apps professionally in 2004 in a capacity within a university, things from online voting to grants management to governance. Since 2014, I've been doing that in a state government capacity, although not in the Adirondack Park space. And I specifically spend a lot of time thinking about how to digitize paper-based processes, something that I think all of us in just about any sector would like to do more of. So a lot of that work involves taking clients' paper-intensive processes and reworking them as online applications. So I've accumulated a lot of ideas about how to approach this work, and I have stories and scars to back up most of that. So I just want to frame this app in a larger goal for our organization. We're very much about promoting adaptive visitor use management approaches, which all relate to collecting good data about visitor use and impacts on the natural resources in the park. There's going to be later webinars in our series that go into great depth about the visitor use, what visitor use management is. But for the purposes of this app, we're looking to collect data that are accurate, so reflective of reality on the ground. We're looking for them to be precise to a level that's useful for management. We're looking for them to be complete and consistent in terms of what they capture about each visitor experience. We want them to be comparable across areas and activities. We want them to be real time. We want to be able to access information about impacts as they're happening so that we can act on them quickly. We also want them to be secure. So if we're collecting personal information, we want to make sure that people's privacy is protected. And finally, they need to be relevant to the current resource management needs. And this is the adaptive part, in my view, is what data we need and where we need to focus changes all the time as we understand the problems or as the problems evolve. So this particular app fits into an existing data collection process that I think we're all very familiar with, but may not think of as much of a data collection process. It's the trail register that I'm sure everyone here has at least seen, hopefully filled out on your way into the backcountry. So this is the only picture I was able to find online of the trail register. But it kind of, highlights some of the issues right there with the register. This person has written a note that folks need to write their entries at the beginning instead of the end of the book. So the Trail Register is a paper-based data collection instrument that theoretically captures a representative sample of visits to most of. So this is a list of what the DEC Trail Register captures. Simple stuff, once again, probably familiar to all of you, but the date of the trip, some information about the leader, the number of people in the group, the length of the stay, and a checkbox for when they checked out. It also captures their destinations. It's a free form, to just scribble in where you're going. As far as I know, these are the current uses for the Trail Register. So the big one is it could save your life. Finding a missing party, it may help rangers to figure out where you were headed or confirm where you were headed if you hopefully have already told somebody who got in touch with them where you were going. We understand in some cases they're also used for tallying like monthly use at some trailheads, but it's not clear that this is done widely or systematically. And finally, it's used to some extent to communicate among parties visiting a place. Like you might look at it and see where people are headed to camp and get some sense of, do I think the lean-to is going to be free at the end of the trail? The problems with paper forms, including this register, the kind of problems with paper anywhere is there's poor quality control at the point of collection, right? The person might not, the penmanship might not be clear. People may make mistakes or misinterpret what they're supposed to put in, or they might just, not have the name quite right of the place they're going. There's lots of opportunity for omissions and errors in these forms. Getting actual data out of them is very labor intensive. Someone or something has to digitize this information to make it usable. For a person, this is very labor intensive. For a machine, it's also technically challenging because computers have as much difficulty as people deciphering penmanship. It's also a chore for the visitor who has to enter the information because they have to, open the box and write the information in, including the same personal details over and over again. It's definitely not real time. If money and labor was no object, it still wouldn't be real time because people are adding the information in real time, but somebody has to physically collect and process that information to turn it into data. That's a batching step. So it would be a huge investment to make it happen consistently and frequently, and even then you wouldn't be able to do it real time. It's only in the English language. So if you have visitors who do not read and write English well, you may not get them to use it properly. It's not private, so everyone can see the information that's written in the register. That might make people uncomfortable sharing their home address, for example, or contact information in a place where they know it may be visible for months or longer. It's also not hard to envision a scenario where a person traveling alone to a remote location might have concerns about disclosing to anyone else who happens to drive up to the trailhead and look at the register. And finally, there's also a good question about what's in it for the visitor. I mean, most people aren't going into the wilderness expecting to need to be rescued. That certainly is an incentive to fill it out, but there's a huge wealth of information in there that is not presented in a way that is particularly useful to the people providing it. And another thing is some of that information would be more useful before they reach the trailhead and they have to go to the trailhead to see it. So the question this app seeks to answer is, what could a digital solution do to improve upon the existing trail register experience? If we're starting with that as our model, how would we reinvent it in the context of the digital age? So we have a few things here. Basic principles. We will validate information at the point of collection. So that means building logic into our forms to assure that what people are entering is plausible information, to avoid common kinds of mistakes, maybe provide drop downs or search options that make it easy to put in valid information. We want to automate the flow of data in real time. So users can register their personal details once and have them reused on each visit, not have to re-enter them. And we want to collect information digitally and aggregate it online in a database so it's immediately available for any kind of analysis or monitoring function. We want to support multiple languages, have it internationalized. The goals I'm familiar in New York State are generally state agencies try to have their important documents available in the 6 most commonly spoken languages in households where English is not the primary language. Those are languages like Haitian Creole, Mandarin, Spanish, Korean, Russian, plus we're close to Quebec, so obviously French would be a priority as well. We want to protect people's personal information. So we want to show the user their own data in full, but when we're sharing data from other users, we want to do so in a way that protects individual privacy. And finally, we want to provide relevant information about others in aggregate in a relevant way. So that might be including information about, real-time usage, like how crowded is the parking lot, how crowded are the destinations I'm going to. It would also be educational and informational details that are specific to the time, place, or other details of the visit and the visitor. So we've got hopefully this demo will go smoothly. I've got the app as we have it deployed for sort of a test here. See, I gotta get out of full screen. There we go. Yeah, a few preliminaries about this. So we're looking at it in a Google Chrome browser in a view called development mode that allows us to simulate what it would look like on a smartphone. So the idea with this app is most people these days have a smartphone. And that's sort of the primary device for which we're initially designing this app. So this over here shows what it would look like on a smartphone, even though it's on my computer. And so our web address for this is vumtdemo.adirondack.wilderness.org. When you first visit it, you get an information prompt explaining the nature of this app, hopefully making clear that it is not an official tool yet. And the first thing you typically would do to interact with it is register to use it. So I'll just show that real quick. This is a one-time use, and then you'd be able to use it from then on. So I'll just fill in some of my own information here. So very similar to the personal details that are collected, but here we start to see things a little different. As I put the country, because I selected United States, I have to provide my state. If it was Anything other than the US or Canada, we wouldn't ask for that level of geographic detail, but and all right. And there's also options to change your preferred unit of measure, and whether or not you want to use geolocation. Now, when I click register, I'm going to get an error because I'm already registered. So it's not going to let me with that email, which is fine because I think we want to go back to the front page and try logging in as a registered user. So I'm going to do that, and then we can do the basic, visit registration feature. And here, there are two major flavors of visit registration. So one of the things in this developer mode is I can control, I can simulate where my GPS location is. So I put the Adirondack Lodge coordinates in here. And if I go to add a visit, being at the Adirondack Lodge, it detects that I'm close to a trailhead and presumes that I want to start my trip right now from that trailhead. So I'm going to say yes to that. I have to tell it where I'm going. And we've got very limited options in here right now because this is just for demonstration and testing. So I'll say I'm going to Algonquin. Next, the number of people in the group, let's say 2. One vehicle that is a new piece of information we're collecting, and how many nights are we going to be out? 0. And then I add the visit and I'm checked in. So we're aiming for something like that where you don't have to do a lot to record your trip. All right, so now that that's in, I'm going to demonstrate a slightly different experience, which is, let's say I'm not close to a trailhead. So I'm putting in a location that's near where I live in Schenectady. We have our own central park in Schenectady, which is quite confusing. Right, so if I click add visit now, it does not detect that I'm close to a trailhead. So now it asks me for some other information because it assumes that I'm planning a trip for the future. So let's say I'm planning a trip for 10 o'clock tonight. I'm just going to drive up to the lodge right after this and start my hike. Here you'll see some of that real-time information. It tells me that there's 3 other parties, total of 5 people and 3 parked vehicles out of 100 spaces at the Adirondack Lodge, which is the nearest trailhead to me. So that gives an idea of how it's pulling together real-time information to give me a sense of how busy the place I'm going is going to be. And then the next step is to pick my locations. The rest of this is just like the other one. I'll make it Marcy this time. Number of people in the group. Let's say 1 this time, 1 vehicle, 0 nights, and add visit. And it doesn't check me in automatically in this case because it's a trip that's planned for later elsewhere. So that's the basic, visitor registration experience. Since I'm also an administrator of the system, I just wanted to give you a sense of like the components here of what we can do with it. It has a feature for districts, which are areas or regions. So I'll pick the recent sanctuary. So this is one I just put in for testing purposes. This is a lovely little birding preserve near where I live. It's also adjacent to the Kelly Adirondack Center, which is the former home of Paul Schaefer, famed Adirondack wilderness advocate. Well worth a visit if you happen to be in the area. and I can actually edit this geography right here in the web browser. So I don't need, GIS software or other external tools to make tweaks or additions. And once I've got those districts, I can further do things like go into this advisories feature, and I can add advisories where I can specify, I'll just edit this Marcy one. I can specify the time period that they apply, and I can specify districts that they cover. So if somebody has specified a destination within that area, they will see the advisory that applies. So this one is Marcy Summit, but I had it end, I think I had it running last winter. So let's just update that to be this winter. Or let's say the snow's coming early. All right, so I'm going to say it started today. And I'm going to say it's ending April 2022. And notice also I can put in different translations here. So if you have translations of these advisories prepared in the right languages, you can have them all in here. So I'll update that. And if I have done that right, then when I go back to here and I go to check in on my Marcy hike, that advisory now pops up because I'm going to the Marcy Summit in the time frame that advisory is supposed to be listed. So the idea there is, to provide personalized education information right in their registration frame as they're filling out their form. So that is sort of the core functionality that we have today in the app. It does have a long way to go, and there are a number of other things planned, but that's what we got right now. So I'm going to go back to the presentation here, and I can talk a little bit about our planned features. So let's start with the map-based destination selection. So one thing we want to add is an ability to pick those destinations on a map, because for a lot of people, that's the preferred way to do it. Maybe you also have the ability to select routes, so you'd be able to tap the routes that you're taking to and from those destinations. We want to add a feature for calibration with other data sources, because one of the most powerful tools for assuring information quality is to calibrate it against an independent and accurate observation. We envision adding features that would allow us to import or add visitor counts from a separate source, like a trail counter or maybe a person doing trail counting. That would allow us to reconcile the numbers and get a sense of things like, if our system says there are 4 parties with a total of 10 people registered to go, then we should expect to see actually 6 parties with 13 people, that sort of thing. We also want to add an offline operation capability, so making the app work well in places where internet service may be unreliable or entirely unavailable. This might involve a combination of either improving connectivity at some of those locations if they're really important popular areas, or providing a way for folks to record their visit and have it beamed up at a later point. Another item we're exploring is a kiosk mode of operation. So the notion that you might have a kiosk that's logged into the system as a kiosk that folks could use more along the lines of a traditional trail register, but would still provide the data collection advantages of digital. And we're also looking to align to something called the Recreation Information Database, which is a federal government project. if you go to recreation.gov, they have a clearinghouse for locating all of the federally managed recreational destinations and activities across the US. There's a very robust database and standard for representing those resources. So we're kind of looking to align some of our data structures with that, having it in mind that if this system could also be used to build a database of state and local preserves, and perhaps someday it could be interoperable with the federal one. And in case that sounds a little far-fetched, it's a common practice. New York State is already doing this in the context of another program called Open New York, where it publishes huge amounts of data, and those data sets all appear in a federal open data catalog as well through a process called federation. I wanted to talk a little bit about our approach to development, because I think it speaks to how we're hoping to engage folks. And I think that's one of the distinguishing things about this project is we're hoping to build a community that is broad enough and large enough to sustain a tool like this and continue to grow it in the future. So I'm gonna, each of these bullets, I'm gonna speak a little bit more in depth about. So one concept is we want to start simple and low key. So by that, we mean starting at a single complex with a limited number of trails and destinations. This allows us to limit some of the complexity of the initial deployment. We want it to be a place that has existing Wi-Fi or mobile internet connectivity, because it's much easier to make apps work well with reliable internet. We also want to make sure that, particularly at the Trailhead, folks have ready internet access. We don't want to associate it with a hot button issue or site. So we're trying to keep it simple. We don't want to add the complexity of permitting, fees, reservations, initially, at least. And we want to stay away from places where politics around data might get in the way of experimenting and learning with this tool. Oops. And finally, the playbook element of this, we want to build a repeatable process for bringing on new partners. So, and that's more than just the technology. I mean, the technology is certainly like part of this. You have to have a tool that is robust and works and does what it needs to do. But I think it's probably even more so about what gets people on board and what processes do you have to have in place. So how do we persuade folks to use the app? How do we make it relevant to the resource managers and the other stakeholders? As far as learning, we want to have early real world use of the app so that we really test it and find out what pieces need to be filled in to make it a useful tool. We've recently announced that our organization engaged Chad Dawson. He's a leading expert on visitor use management and the Adirondack Park specifically, and he will be advising our efforts to adapt and promote this tool for management challenges in the forest preserve. We'll also be looking to him for resources he can bring in to advise us on the trajectory of this tool, what features matter the most, what information matters the most. I hope our test deployments of this tool might also appeal to researchers in this field who might see it as a case study that they can contribute insights to. We're going to build out dashboards and analytics to understand the user experience. So a big piece of a digital app is that you can capture data about how people are using it, as well as the information they're putting in. So things like basic measures of success and failure rates, doing common tasks like registering or adding a visit. We'll also, seek to build out those calibration features that I mentioned earlier. And finally, we want to identify additional personas that will emerge from these early iterations. So a persona is like a distinct user role around which we would design application features and workflows. So we want to look at additional personas beyond the visitors themselves. For example, rangers who might want information for search and rescue or preventative search and rescue activities. Or we might want resource managers to have data that they can export for analysis about trends over time. We also want to refine our understanding of the visitor personas. For example, do different activities or levels of experience require the application to behave differently? Hopefully without getting into too much jargon or business speak, this slide is about what in software development is called agile software development. I think of it as the software counterpart to the adaptive component of user management, so emphasis on adaptive. We want to improve and release this product frequently when it begins to get use. So we're talking about new features in days and weeks, not years and months, which allows us to quickly test new ideas for features and keep the momentum of improving this tool moving forward. To do that, we use something called test-driven development and continuous deployment, which basically means there's a suite of tests that make sure everything in the application works as designed, that we can run automatically. So if we add a new feature within a few minutes, we can verify that it doesn't break anything. And in fact, we could even deploy it into real world use within a few minutes. So far, we have a test suite with over 250 unit tests. That's the tests of components of the application that store data or retrieve data. And we have 93 test integration scenarios that spin up a web browser and perform a representative set of tasks like registering a user or checking in a visit. Finally, we want to open the door to wider partnerships. And this is related a little bit to the adaptive approach, but the emphasis is a little different. I think what we're doing is relevant to anyone who manages a nature preserve. And there are a lot of resource managers besides DEC in the Adirondack context in New York alone. So we're designing for that broader use, with that broader use case in mind. I'm thinking about, land trusts and lots of other state and local government agencies that manage various preserves. We think that those not only are organizations that might find it useful, but those may include ones that are ideal partners for early development of the tool, where you've got a fairly small constituency that you have to organize in order to start testing it out and putting it to use. We have an open roadmap on our product website. So I'm just gonna here, I'm gonna close that and I don't have it up. So we use something called GitHub for managing the source code of the project, and it also is where we track feature requests. So there's an issues page where we have all of our sort of proposed features open, and anybody can go into this and make comments or suggestions or their own proposals. The source code for the application is also open, which means the technologically inclined could, go make a modification or improvement to a copy of it and then share that with us to include in our code as well. We've already had one contributor from from, I believe she was from Cleveland, Ohio, volunteered to translate the application into Spanish. And from the time she proposed it to actually getting in the source code was like a few days. We've got sort of a longer range plan to work with folks in our supporters group to pilot perhaps in some of your local preserves, maybe in the context of a playbook for expanding use, and comprehensive documentation, of course, is part of this project as well. All right. So ways we are anticipating involving folks and moving on into the next step with this. We want to launch a real world pilot with a partner agency to expand this in the context of visitor use management practices. We want to continue to work through that feature backlog. So that's the proposed features that I discussed earlier. And we certainly welcome, need all the help we can get to do that. So we're looking for technical contributors. So folks, if you have coding skills, if you're familiar with GitHub, and you also have an interest in the Adirondacks, please reach out to us, as well as lay users. So if you just want to try out the app and give some feedback about what you think works well in it and what could be improved, I'd love to hear that too. And my contact information is here. And with that, I would say I'd love to hear what questions or thoughts you have to share.
Thanks, Ari. So we do have a question from Bill Ingersoll, and the question is, ballpark, what do you estimate the price tag to be to implement this tool at, say, a relatively small nature park?
Yeah, so I think with this tool, the costs are mostly fixed costs. So there's a lot of work to do to make it functional and feature rich enough to use. I think if we had paid developers working on it full time, that would be something they could probably turn around in several months. And we'd be looking at, I'm going to say somewhere around $100,000. So a very rough estimate. Once you have a sufficiently useful code base, you'd want to have somebody maintaining it long term. So if that was a part-time job for a person, there might be an ongoing, developer cost that would be, I'm going to say another 50,000 or so a year. And if it was just one preserve using it, of course, they would bear that whole cost. But if you had a whole bunch of preserves use it, that could be distributed across all of them. Okay. With a marginal additional cost for the additional users.
Right. Anyone else, you can either raise your hand and I can give you the floor using the raise hand button down there at the bottom of your Zoom UI, or you can type a question using the Q&A button. So we're open for questions. And as maybe there's not going to be one thing I would mention, Ari did refer to Chad Dawson, who is a world expert in the area of visitor use management. He's going to be our next webinar speaker. So stay tuned, check out our website or read our emails or whatever. We'll be announcing that within the next few days. So we're going to continue this focus on visitor use management because it's clearly one of the big issues facing the park right now. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions, Ari, so I'll just thank everybody for joining And thank you, Ari, for putting this together. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.